The dust hadn't settled on the horizon when Martha Caldwell realized her wedding dress would be her burial shroud. The iron shackles around her wrists told a story no preacher would ever read aloud, and the 6 men dragging her toward the Mexican border had murder written in their eyes. But what they didn't know was that somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Texas plains, a man who hadn't spoken a word in 3 years was watching. And silence, as they were about to learn, could be deadlier than any gunshot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of October 15th, 1887, should have been the happiest day of Martha Caldwell's life. Instead, it became the day she learned that trust could kill faster than a rattlesnake's bite. She stood before the cracked mirror in the back room of Millfield's only church, adjusting the ivory lace that had belonged to her grandmother. The tchadjiki dress was the finest thing in 3 counties, shipped all the way from San Antonio at considerable expense. Her father, Judge William Caldwell, had spared no cost for his only daughter's wedding to Benjamin Torres, the wealthy cattle barons. "Son from El Paso." "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her father said, his weathered hands gentle as he fastened the pearl buttons along her spine. His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too much frontier justice, but his eyes held nothing but love for his daughter. Martha smiled, though something cold had been gnawing at her stomach since dawn. "Papa, are you certain about Benjamin? I barely know him, and what I do know—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice the doubts that had been plaguing her for weeks. Judge Caldwell's reflection in the mirror hardened slightly. "Martha, this marriage secures our future. The Torres family controls half the cattle trade between here and Mexico. With the railroad coming through, we need their protection and their money. But the stories about him, about his business dealings, are just that. Stories." Her father's tone brooked no argument. "Benjamin Torres will provide for you in ways I never could. The frontier is changing, daughter. Those who adapt survive, those who don't." He didn't finish the sentence, but Martha had heard enough. Of his courtroom speeches to know where it led, the church bells began to toll, their bronze voices carrying across the dusty streets of Millfield. Through the window, Martha could see the guests gathering, ranchers, shopkeepers, and travelers who had come from as far as Fort Worth for what everyone called the wedding of the decade. What she couldn't see was the group of 6 men positioned at strategic points around the town, their hands resting casually on their gun belts, their eyes scanning not for threats to the wedding party, but for escape routes. Benjamin Torres stood at the altar, resplendent in a black suit that probably cost more than most men made in a year. He was handsome in the way that dangerous men often were, sharp features, calculating eyes, and a smile that never quite reached those eyes. At 28, he had already earned a reputation as a man who got what he wanted, regardless of the cost to others. As Martha walked down the aisle, her hand resting on her father's arm, she noticed things that others might have missed. The way Benjamin's men were positioned throughout the church, the nervous glances exchanged between some of the guests, the fact that several faces she expected to see, longtime family friends, were notably absent. The ceremony proceeded with all the pomp Judge Caldwell had arranged. Reverend Morrison, a man who had baptized Martha as an infant, spoke the traditional words with what seemed like unusual haste. His hands shook slightly as he held the Bible, and more than once his eyes darted toward the back of the church. "Do you, Benjamin Torres, take Martha Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Benjamin's voice was smooth as aged whiskey and twice as intoxicating to those who didn't know its true effects. "Do you, Martha Caldwell, take Benjamin Torres to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Martha opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The church, which should have been filled with the warm murmur of celebration, felt cold and tense. Even the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows seemed dimmed. She began, then stopped. Benjamin's grip on her hand tightened, not in reassurance, but in warning. "She does," Judge Caldwell said quickly, his voice carrying the authority of years on the bench. "She's just overcome with emotion." Reverend Morrison nodded hastily and pronounced them husband and wife. Benjamin's kiss was possessive rather than loving, and when he pulled away, Martha saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. The reception was held at the Millfield Hotel, the largest building in town after the courthouse. Tables groaned under the weight of food that had been prepared for days, and a small band played popular tunes from back east. But Martha noticed that many of the guests seemed more interested in watching the doors than in celebrating. "Mrs. Torres," Benjamin said, the title rolling off his tongue like a claim of ownership. "I think it's time we discussed our future." He led her away from the crowd to a corner table where two of his men stood guard. Up close, Martha could see that these weren't cowboys or ranch hands. These were killers. Men whose eyes held the flat, dead look of those who had taken life and felt nothing. "Benjamin, I don't understand. Why do we need guards? This is supposed to be a celebration." "My dear wife," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout, "there are things about my business that require discretion. The cattle trade is just one of my enterprises." "What other enterprises?" Benjamin smiled, and Martha realized she had never seen a more frightening expression. "Let's just say that the border between Texas and Mexico provides certain opportunities for a man with vision and connections." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The stories she had heard, the ones her father had dismissed as gossip, were true. Benjamin Torres wasn't just a cattle baron, he was a smuggler, probably a murderer, and now she was legally bound to him. "I want to leave," she said, standing abruptly. "I need some air. Sit down." The command was soft but absolute. "You're not going anywhere, Martha. Not now, not ever. You belong to me now, and what's mine stays mine." Your father owes me considerable money. Gambling debts, poor investments, legal fees for cases he should have won but didn't. This marriage doesn't just secure your future, my dear. It pays his debts." Martha felt the world spinning around her. Her father, the man she had trusted above all others, had sold her to pay his debts. The wedding, the celebration, all of it was just an elaborate transaction. "Now," Benjamin continued, "we're going to leave this reception, get into my carriage, and travel to my ranch in Mexico. You'll smile, wave goodbye to all these good people, and play the happy bride. Because if you don't, if you make any kind of scene or try to run, my men have orders to start shooting, and they won't be particular about who they hit." Martha looked around the room with new eyes. Benjamin's men weren't just guards, they were a small army, positioned to control every exit, every possible escape route. The guests, her friends and neighbors, were effectively hostages to ensure her compliance. "You're insane," she whispered. "I'm practical. You're beautiful, educated, and you come from a respected family. You'll be the perfect cover for my operations on both sides of the border. And if you're very good, very obedient, you might even live long enough to enjoy some of the benefits of being Mrs. Benjamin Torres." The band struck up a waltz, and Benjamin stood, extending his hand. "Shall we dance, my dear? One last dance before we begin our journey?" Martha took his hand because she had no choice, but as they moved across the dance floor, she was already planning. Benjamin Torres might have bought her father's cooperation and trapped her in a web of legal marriage and physical threats, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her. The dance ended, and Benjamin led her toward the hotel's front entrance. A black carriage waited outside, its windows covered with heavy curtains. Two more of his men sat on the driver's seat, their rifles clearly visible. "Time to go, Mrs. Torres," Benjamin said, his grip on her arm tight enough to bruise. But as they stepped onto the hotel's front porch, Martha made her move. She had palmed a small pearl-handled derringer from her father's study years ago, a precaution for a young woman living on the frontier. Now she pressed it against Benjamin's ribs through the fabric of her wedding dress. "Let me go," she said quietly, "or I'll put a bullet in your lung right here in front of everyone." Benjamin laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My dear Martha, that little toy holds 2 shots at most. I have 6 men here, and they're all faster than you could ever be. Pull that trigger, and you'll be dead before my body hits the ground, along with half the wedding guests." She knew he was right, but she had to try something. The alternative was a life of slavery that would end with her death the moment she was no longer useful. "Besides," Benjamin continued, his voice carrying a note of genuine amusement, "that gun isn't loaded. I had my men search your belongings this morning. Did you really think I hadn't researched my investment thoroughly? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Martha's heart sank as she pulled the trigger and heard only the click of the hammer. On an empty chamber, Benjamin's men moved with practiced efficiency, one of them producing a set of iron shackles that he locked around her wrists, while the other held a gun on the wedding guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Benjamin announced to the crowd that had gathered to watch the newlyweds depart, "my bride is a bit overcome with excitement. We'll be taking a leisurely trip to our new home in Mexico. Please continue enjoying the celebration." The shackles were heavier than Martha had expected, the iron cold against her skin, even through her lace gloves. As Benjamin's men helped her into the carriage, she caught sight of her father standing in the hotel doorway. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something that might have been regret, but it was too late for regret. The carriage began to move, carrying her away from everything she had ever known toward a fate that would likely be worse than death. Through the small gap in the curtains, she watched Millfield disappear behind a cloud of dust. What Martha didn't know was that someone else was watching too. About a mile outside of town, a lone figure sat motionless on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. The man wore the rough clothes of a working rancher, his hat pulled low over his face. He had been there for hours, waiting with the patience of someone who understood that timing was everything. His name was Caleb Mitchell, though few people in the territory knew it. 3 years ago, he had been known as one of the fastest guns in Texas, a reputation that had cost him everything he held dear. Now he lived alone on a small ranch, speaking to no one, trusting no one, wanting nothing more than to be left in peace. But sometimes peace was a luxury a man couldn't afford. The carriage wheels ground against the hardpan earth as they rolled deeper into the wasteland between Texas and Mexico. Martha's wrists had gone numb from the iron shackles, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the realization that she was completely alone. Benjamin sat across from her, cleaning his fingernails with a silver knife that caught the dying light filtering through the curtain gaps. He hadn't spoken since they left Millfield, but his silence felt more threatening than any words could have been. "Where exactly are we going?" Martha finally asked, her voice hoarse from the dust that seeped into the carriage, despite the closed windows. "Patience, my dear. All will be revealed in due time." Benjamin's smile was razor-thin. "Though I will say this, where we're headed, screaming won't help you. The nearest civilized town is 200 miles in any direction." Through the floorboards, Martha could hear the conversation between the drivers. They spoke in rapid Spanish, occasionally laughing at jokes she couldn't understand. But she caught enough words to piece together fragments. "La mercancía," the merchandise. "El patrón está contento," the boss is happy. "Cuánto vale esta?" How much is this one worth? They were talking about her like she was livestock, as Darkness fell. The carriage finally stopped. Martha heard the jingle of harnesses and the stamp of tired horses. One of Benjamin's men opened the door, and she was hauled out into the cooling desert air. They had stopped at what appeared to be ruins, the remains of an old Spanish mission, its adobe walls crumbling but still standing. Campfires dotted the courtyard, and Martha counted at least 20 men moving about in the shadows. This wasn't just Benjamin's wedding party escort. This was an army. "Welcome to my headquarters," Benjamin said, gesturing grandly at the ruins. "Isn't it romantic? A bride's first sight of her new home." Martha was dragged toward what had once been the mission's main chapel. Inside, the religious artifacts had been replaced with tables covered in maps, weapons, and stacks of money. The altar now served as Benjamin's desk, covered with correspondence in multiple languages. "You see, Martha, this is where I conduct my real business. The cattle ranch in El Paso, that's just for show, to keep the Texas Rangers and the Mexican federales happy. My actual operations are somewhat more diverse." He walked to one of the tables and picked up a leather-bound ledger. "Arms smuggling to various revolutionary groups, human trafficking for the mining operations in Sonora, opium from the Chinese crews building the railroad, and occasionally, very occasionally, I acquire special merchandise. Special merchandise. Women of particular quality, educated, refined, from good families. There are certain wealthy collectors in Mexico City who pay handsomely for such rarities." Benjamin's eyes moved over her like she was a horse he was evaluating. "You, my dear, will fetch a premium price." The full horror of her situation crashed over Martha like a cold wave. The marriage had been a sham from the beginning. Benjamin had never intended to keep her as a wife. She was merchandise, just like the weapons and opium. "My father, did he know?" "Of course he knew. Judge Caldwell has been in my employ for 2 years. Who do you think has been ensuring that my associates avoid prosecution when they're caught in Texas? Your father is an excellent investment. Corrupt judges are so much more reliable than honest ones." Martha felt sick. Everything she had believed about her life, her family, her future, had been built on lies. Her father hadn't been trapped by debt. He had been a willing participant in Benjamin's criminal empire from the beginning. "Now," Benjamin continued, "you have a choice. You can cooperate, make this easy for everyone, and I'll ensure your eventual buyer treats you well. Or you can fight, in which case I'll let my men have some entertainment before we reach Mexico City. Either way, you're not going home." Before Martha could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Men were shouting in Spanish, and she heard the distinctive sound of rifles being cocked. "What now?" Benjamin muttered, striding to the chapel entrance. One of his lieutenants, a scarred man named Ramirez, came running. "Patron, there's a rider approaching. Just one man, but he's not responding to our challenges." "1 man?" Benjamin laughed. "Against 20? Shoot him." "We tried, Patron. He's staying just out of rifle range, but close enough that we can see him. He's just sitting there." Benjamin's expression darkened. In his line of work, men who showed no fear were usually the most dangerous. "Bring me my spyglass." Through the chapel's broken windows, Martha could see a lone figure silhouetted against the moonlit horizon. Even at this distance, there was something unsettling about the man's stillness. He sat his horse like a statue, unmoving, watching. Benjamin peered through the spyglass for a long moment, then lowered it with a curse. "I know that horse. That's Caleb Mitchell." The name sent a ripple of unease through the men who had gathered. Even Martha, sheltered as she had been, had heard stories of Caleb Mitchell. They said he was the fastest gun in Texas before he disappeared 3 years ago. They said he had killed 17 men in fair fights and twice that many in situations that weren't so fair. "I thought Mitchell was dead," Ramirez said nervously. "So did I, but that's definitely him." Benjamin snapped the spyglass shut. "What does he want?" "Maybe he heard about the wedding, Patron. Maybe he's interested in the bride." Benjamin's face went white with rage. "No one takes what's mine. No one." He turned to Martha, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Did you know about this? Did you arrange some kind of rescue?" "I've never even seen the man," Martha said truthfully. "I don't know why he's here." "Well, we're about to find out." Benjamin strode outside, his men following. "Mitchell!" he shouted. "Across the desert. This is private business. Ride away." The figure on the horizon didn't move, didn't respond. The silence stretched until it became more unnerving than any threat could have been. "I said ride away." Benjamin's voice cracked slightly. "There's nothing here for you." Still nothing. Benjamin turned to his men. "Spread out. Circle around behind him. If he won't leave, we'll make him leave." But as his men began to move, the figure on the horizon did something unexpected. He dismounted, ground-tied his horse, and began walking toward the mission. Not fast, not slow, just a steady, purposeful pace that spoke of absolute confidence. "Shoot him!" Benjamin screamed. "Shoot him now!" The rifles cracked in the night air, muzzle flashes lighting up the desert, but the walking figure didn't break stride, didn't dive for cover, didn't show any sign that he was even aware of the bullets buzzing around him. "He's too far!" Ramirez called out. "We can't hit him at this range in the dark." "Then get closer, you idiots." Several of Benjamin's men began advancing, but something about the approaching figure made them hesitant. There was something otherworldly about a man who would walk steadily toward 20 armed enemies without even drawing his weapon. Martha watched from the chapel doorway, her heart hammering. She didn't know who this Caleb Mitchell was or why he was here, but he represented the first hope she had felt since the carriage had pulled away from Millfield. "Patron," one of the lookouts called. "He's in rifle range now." "Then kill him." The rifles spoke again, but this time Martha could see the walking figure clearly in the moonlight. He was tall, lean, wearing a dark coat and hat. And he was still, walking at the same steady pace, as if the bullets were no more bothersome than mosquitoes. "How is he not dead?" Ramirez whispered. Benjamin grabbed a rifle from one of his men and took aim himself. He was known as an excellent shot, capable of hitting a silver dollar at 50 yards. The rifle boomed, and Martha saw dust kick up inches from the walking man's feet, but he didn't even look down. He just kept walking. "This is impossible," Benjamin muttered, working the rifle's action. "No one's that lucky." He fired again, and this time Martha was sure she saw the bullet tear through the man's coat. But still he walked, now close enough that she could see his face under the brim of his hat. Caleb Mitchell had the weathered features of a man who had spent years under the desert sun, but his eyes were what made Martha's breath catch. They were the coldest, most implacable eyes she had ever seen. They were the eyes of a man who had looked death in the face so many times that he no longer feared it. "Stand down," Benjamin shouted to his men. "Let him come. We'll settle this face to face." But Martha could hear the fear in his voice now. Whatever reputation Benjamin Torres had built for himself, it paled beside the legend walking toward them through the desert night. Caleb Mitchell stopped 20 feet from the chapel entrance. Up close, Martha could see that he was younger than she had expected, probably not much older than Benjamin, but there was something ancient in his bearing, as if he carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Benjamin Torres," he said, and his voice was like gravel in a dry riverbed. The first words he had spoken in 3 years. Mitchell. Benjamin tried to sound confident, but Martha could see his hands shaking. "What do you want?" The woman. 2 words spoken with quiet finality. Benjamin laughed, but it sounded forced. "The woman is my wife, legally married, properly documented. You have no claim here." "The woman," Caleb repeated as if Benjamin hadn't spoken. "Now see here, Mitchell, I know your reputation, but I have 20 men. 20. You're fast, but you're not that fast." Caleb's eyes moved slowly across the assembled gunmen, as if he were counting them. Then he looked back at Benjamin and said something that made Martha's blood run cold. "Good!" The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Benjamin's men began to shift nervously, hands moving toward their weapons, but something in Caleb's stillness kept them from drawing. "You're insane," Benjamin said. "You can't take on 20 men and win. It's impossible." 3 years ago, Caleb said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, "I rode into a cantina in Laredo. 7 men inside, all of them faster than your boys here. All of them dead before I finished. My drink, that was 3 years ago. You've been hiding on that ranch of yours, gone soft, maybe." Caleb's hand moved to rest on his gun butt, and Martha saw several of Benjamin's men take involuntary steps backward. Only one way to find out. The tension in the air was so thick, Martha could taste it. She realized she was holding her breath, waiting for the explosion of violence that seemed inevitable. But Benjamin wasn't stupid. He had survived this long by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. "What do you want, Mitchell? Really? The woman can't mean anything to you. You don't even know her." "I know enough." "Then name your price. Money, weapons, territory, everything's negotiable." Caleb's cold eyes fixed on Benjamin with laser intensity. "The woman walks free tonight. No chains, no pursuit, no revenge. She goes home to Texas, and you pretend she never existed." "And if I refuse?" "Then we settle this the old way." Benjamin looked around at his men, trying to gauge their willingness to die for a woman they had never met. What he saw in their faces clearly didn't reassure him. "You know what, Mitchell? You can have her. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway. But you and I aren't finished. Someday, somewhere, we'll meet again. I'll be waiting." Benjamin nodded to Ramirez, who reluctantly produced the key to Martha's shackles. As the iron fell away from her wrists, she felt a surge of hope for the first time in hours. But as she moved toward Caleb Mitchell, she realized that her rescue had come at a price. The man who had saved her was clearly dangerous, possibly more dangerous than Benjamin Torres himself, and she still had no idea why he had risked his life for a woman he had never met. Martha's legs nearly gave out as she walked across the 20 feet of desert sand that separated her from Caleb Mitchell. The wedding dress that had seemed so beautiful that morning now felt like a costume from a nightmare, its ivory silk stained with dust and fear. Caleb watched her approach with those unsettling eyes, his hand still resting on his gun. Up close, she could see the details that distance had hidden, the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, the way his coat hung to conceal what was obviously more than one weapon, the absolute stillness that marked him as a predator among sheep. "Can you ride?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. "Yes," Martha managed, though her throat felt like sandpaper. "Hard, fast, for hours without stopping?" "If I have to." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "You'll have to." Behind them, Benjamin's voice cut through the night air like a whip crack. "Enjoy your victory, Mitchell, but remember, I know who you are now. I know where you live. This isn't over." Caleb turned slowly, his movement liquid and controlled. "Torres," the name came out like a curse. "Touch my land, and I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Threaten anyone under my protection, and I'll make you beg for death before I grant it." The promise hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Benjamin's men shifted uneasily, and Martha saw more than one hand move away from weapon grips. Even surrounded by his army, Benjamin Torres had just been made to feel very, very alone. Caleb whistled, a low, musical sound that carried across the desert. Within moments, his horse trotted into the circle of firelight. It was a magnificent animal, a buckskin stallion that moved with the same predatory grace as its master. But what made Martha's breath catch was the second horse following behind. A smaller mare, already saddled and ready. "You came prepared," she said, more to herself than to him. "Always." He handed her the mare's reins. "We ride north until dawn, then east toward the border. Don't talk, don't ask questions, don't make noise. These men will follow us once their courage returns." Martha mounted awkwardly, the wedding dress bunching around her legs. She hadn't ridden side saddle in years, and never in a garment designed for standing at altars rather than fleeing across deserts. "I can't ride properly in this dress," she said. Without a word, Caleb produced a knife from his boot and tossed it to her. "Fix it." Martha caught the blade, and after a moment's hesitation, began cutting away the lower portions of her skirt. The sound of tearing silk seemed obscenely loud in the tense silence. When she finished, the dress ended just below her knees, scandalous by any measure, but practical for hard riding. "Better," Caleb said, and swung onto his stallion with fluid ease. They rode out of the mission ruins at a steady trot, not fast enough to seem like panic, but quick enough to put distance between them and Benjamin's army. Martha could feel 20 pairs of eyes boring into her back, but she didn't look. Around, once they were beyond rifle range, Caleb spurred his horse to a canter. The mare followed suit automatically, and Martha found herself racing across the moonlit desert beside a man who was still essentially a stranger. For the first hour, they rode in silence. The only sounds were the drum of hooves on hardpan, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind through desert grass. Martha's mind raced with questions, but something about Caleb's bearing discouraged conversation. Finally, as they paused to rest the horses at a small creek, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you help me?" Caleb was watering his stallion, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me. You could have been killed. You were outnumbered 20-1, 19-1. Torres doesn't fight his own battles." Martha studied his profile in the moonlight. "You knew him before tonight, didn't you? This wasn't random." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We ride." They mounted again and continued north, but Martha's curiosity was now fully aroused. There had been something in his voice when he spoke Benjamin's name, something personal and bitter. 3 years, she said as they rode. "Benjamin's men said you disappeared 3 years ago. What happened?" "Nothing happened. Men like you don't just disappear for nothing." "What did Benjamin Torres do to you?" This time, Caleb reined in his horse, so abruptly that Martha had to wheel around to avoid riding past him. His eyes, when they met hers, were flat and deadly. "Lady, I saved your life tonight. Don't make me regret it by asking questions that will get you killed." "You can't scare me away from the truth. I've had enough of men keeping secrets from me." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You've got a spine, that's good. You'll need it before this is over." "Before what's over?" Instead of answering, Caleb pointed to the southern horizon, where a faint glow was visible against the night sky. "Torches. They're coming." Martha squinted but could barely make out the distant lights. "How many?" "Hard to tell. Maybe 10, maybe more. Torres wouldn't send his whole force. He needs men to guard his base, but he'll send enough to make sure we don't reach civilization." "How far are we from the Texas border?" 30 miles, maybe 40. "We can make it if we ride hard and the horses hold up." Caleb's expression was grim, but they'll be pushing their mounts just as hard, and they know this country better than we do. They rode through the night at a punishing pace, stopping only to rest the horses when absolutely necessary. Martha's legs ached from gripping the mare's sides, and her hands were raw from holding the reins. But she didn't complain. Behind them, the torches seemed to be gaining ground. As dawn approached, they found themselves in rough country, a landscape of arroyos, mesas, and scattered boulder fields that provided both cover and danger. Caleb led them up a narrow canyon, between 2 towering rock walls, the horses' hooves echoing off the stone. "This leads to the border?" Martha asked. Maybe it leads to a dead end where they corner us like rats." Caleb's honesty was brutal, but oddly comforting. But it's our best chance. Halfway up the canyon, disaster struck. Martha's mare stepped wrong on a loose stone and went down hard, throwing her rider against the canyon wall. The horse struggled to its feet, but it was clearly favoring its right foreleg. Lame, Caleb said after a quick examination. She won't carry you another mile. Martha felt despair wash over her. They were so close to safety, but without a horse, she was finished. Take your horse and go, she said. There's no point in both of us dying for Benjamin's revenge. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. You think I'd leave you? I think you're practical. One person has a chance. 2 people on one horse have none. You don't know me very well. Before Martha could ask what he meant, the sound of hoofbeats echoed up the canyon behind them. Their pursuers had found the entrance. Up there, Caleb said, pointing to a ledge about 15 feet above them. Can you climb? Martha looked at the rock face doubtfully. In this dress? I don't think so. Then we make our stand here. Caleb drew his Colt .45, checking the cylinder with practiced efficiency. 6 shots. How many men do you think Torres? A cent? More than 6, probably. His smile was humorless. But maybe they're not all as eager to die as he thinks they are. The hoofbeats were getting closer. Martha could hear voices now, speaking in rapid Spanish. They were trying to be quiet, but the canyon walls amplified every sound. When the shooting starts, Caleb said, get behind those rocks and stay down. Don't try to help, don't try to run. Just stay alive until it's over. What if I don't make it, surrender? Torres wants you alive. That gives you time to find another chance. The first rider appeared around a bend in the canyon, moving cautiously. Martha recognized him as Ramirez, Benjamin's lieutenant. He saw them immediately and raised his rifle, but Caleb's gun was already in his hand. The canyon exploded with gunfire. Ramirez pitched backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. But his death cry had alerted the others, and suddenly the narrow space was filled with muzzle flashes and the whine of ricocheting bullets. Martha pressed herself against the rock wall, watching in fascination and horror as Caleb Mitchell demonstrated why he had become a legend. He moved like liquid mercury, never standing still, always seeking cover, making every shot count. His Colt barked repeatedly, and each time another of Torres's men fell. But there were too many of them. Martha counted at least 8 riders, and more might be coming. Caleb's ammunition wouldn't last forever. A bullet struck the rock inches from Martha's head, showering her with stone chips. She looked up and saw one of the gunmen on the canyon rim above them, trying to get a clear shot. Without thinking, she grabbed a stone and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck the man in the shoulder, spoiling his aim. His shot went wide, but it gave away his position. Caleb's answering bullet took him in the chest, and he tumbled off the ledge to land with a sickening thud on the canyon floor. I told you to stay down, Caleb shouted over the gunfire. You're welcome, Martha shouted back. Despite everything, she thought she saw him almost smile. The gunfight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the echoes finally died away, 5 men lay dead in the canyon, including Ramirez. The survivors had retreated, at least temporarily. Caleb reloaded his weapon with swift, practiced movements. They'll be back with more men. We need to move. How? My horse is lame, and yours can't carry both of us far enough. There's another way. Caleb pointed to a narrow crack in the canyon wall that Martha hadn't noticed before. It's a squeeze, but it leads to another canyon system. From there, we can reach the border on foot. On foot? That's 20 miles. 23, actually, but it's better than being dead. As if to emphasize his point, the sound of approaching hooves echoed up the canyon again. Benjamin Torres had sent reinforcements. Martha looked at the narrow crack in the rock, then at Caleb's determined face. She had spent her entire life in drawing rooms and parlors, protected from the harsh realities of frontier life. Now she was being asked to crawl through a crevice in the desert, fleeing killers across terrain that could itself prove fatal. "All right," she said. "Let's go." Caleb nodded approvingly. "Strip off anything you don't absolutely need. The passage gets narrow." Martha looked down at what remained of her wedding dress. It was already ruined beyond repair, stained with dust and torn by rocks. She began ripping away more of the fabric, reducing it to something approaching functionality. "Ready?" Caleb asked. Martha took one last look at the dead men scattered across the canyon floor, at the lame mare that had carried her so far, at the luxury and safety she was leaving behind forever. "Ready," she said. They squeezed into the crack in the rock just as the first of the new pursuers rounded the bend below. Martha heard shouts of anger and confusion as the men discovered their dead comrades and the abandoned horses. But by then, she and Caleb Mitchell were already gone, swallowed by the desert stone, beginning the most dangerous part of their flight. Toward freedom, the crevice in the rock was barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. Martha pressed her back against one wall and inched forward, feeling the rough stone tear at what remained of her wedding dress. Behind her, she could hear Caleb's steady breathing and the scrape of his boots against the narrow passage floor. "How much further?" she whispered, though whispering seemed pointless in the confines of the rocky tunnel. "Maybe 100 yards. The passage opens into Widow's Canyon on the other side." Widow's Canyon. Martha didn't like the sound of that name, called that because more men have died there than anywhere else in this part of Texas. Apache hunting ground mostly, but they moved north 5 years ago. Should be empty now. Should be. Martha noticed he didn't sound entirely certain. The crevice seemed to go on forever, sometimes widening enough that she could walk normally, sometimes narrowing so much that she had to turn sideways and shuffle. Her hands were bleeding from scraping against the rock, and she could feel similar wounds opening on her back and shoulders where the stone grabbed at her dress. Finally, mercifully, she saw light ahead. Not the harsh glare of desert sun, but the softer glow of early morning, filtering down from above. The passage was opening into another canyon. Martha squeezed through the final constriction and found herself standing on a ledge overlooking a narrow valley. Widow's Canyon was deeper than the one they had left behind, its walls rising at least 200 feet on either side. The floor was sandy and dotted with desert vegetation, but what caught her attention were the white objects, scattered among the rocks, bones, human bones bleached by years of desert sun. "Pleasant place," she said dryly. Caleb emerged from the crevice behind her, moving with the same fluid grace despite the cramped passage. The Apache used to drive their enemies into this canyon and pick them off from the rim. Natural killing. Ground. And we're going to walk through it. We're going to run through it. Our friends from the mission will figure out where we went eventually, and when they do, they'll come through that passage or around the long way. Either route gives us maybe an hour head start. They climbed down from the ledge, Caleb finding handholds and footholds that Martha would never have seen on her own. At the bottom, the bones were even more disturbing. Skulls grinned up from the sand, and rib cages created eerie shadows in the morning light. "Try not to think about it," Caleb said, noticing her expression. "They've been dead longer than you've been alive." They set off across the canyon floor at a steady jog, Caleb setting a pace that was fast enough to cover ground, but not so fast that Martha couldn't maintain it. Her soft, dancing slippers, which had seemed so elegant at the wedding, were completely inadequate for desert travel. Within a mile, her feet were raw and bleeding. "We need to get you proper boots," Caleb said, noticing her stumbling gait. "Where exactly do you propose we find boots out here?" Instead of answering, he led her to one of the more recent skeletons, this one still wearing the remnants of clothing. The dead man had been wearing cavalry boots, and while they were several sizes too large for Martha, they were infinitely better than dancing slippers. "I can't wear a dead man's boots," Martha protested. You can and you will, unless you want to join him permanently. The boots were horrible, stiff leather that rubbed against her feet, far too big, and carrying the musty smell of death. But they protected her feet from the rocks and sand, and that was all that mattered. They had covered perhaps 5 miles when Caleb suddenly stopped, his hand moving to his gun. "Get down," he said quietly. Martha dropped behind a large boulder. Her heart hammering. "What is it?" "Riders coming from the north." Martha peered around the rock and saw them, a line of horsemen silhouetted against the canyon rim. But these weren't Benjamin's men. The riders wore the blue uniforms of the U.S. cavalry, and their leader carried a guidon that snapped in the desert wind. "Soldiers," Martha said with relief. "We're saved." But Caleb's expression remained grim. "Maybe. Or maybe Torres has friends in the army too." The cavalry patrol began descending into the canyon via a switchback trail. Martha hadn't noticed. There were 8 soldiers, led by a young lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. As they approached, Martha could see that their uniforms were dusty and worn, suggesting they had been in the field for some time. "You there!" the lieutenant called out. "Stand and identify yourselves!" Caleb stepped into the open, his hands visible, but ready to move quickly if needed. "Caleb Mitchell, this is Mrs. Caldwell. We're trying to reach the Texas border." "Mrs. Caldwell?" The lieutenant's eyes moved to Martha, taking in her torn wedding dress and oversized boots. "Ma'am, are you all right? You appear to be in some distress." "I've been kidnapped," Martha said quickly, "by Benjamin Torres and his men. Mr. Mitchell rescued me, but they're pursuing us." The lieutenant's expression hardened. "Benjamin Torres. We've been hunting that snake for months. Where did you encounter him?" Martha felt a surge of hope. These soldiers were enemies of Benjamin Torres, which made them friends. "At an old Spanish mission, maybe 20 miles south of here. He has at least 20 men with him, maybe more." 20 men. The lieutenant looked thoughtful. "That's more than we suspected. Sergeant Williams." A grizzled older soldier spurred his horse forward. "Sir, send a rider back to Fort Davis. Tell Colonel Patterson we've found Torres's main base, and we'll need reinforcements to assault it." "Yes, sir." "What about these civilians?" "We'll escort them to safety. Mrs. Caldwell, you and Mr. Mitchell can ride double with 2 of my men. We'll have you across the border within the hour." Martha felt tears of relief starting in her eyes. After the nightmare of the past day, the idea of being under military protection seemed like salvation itself. But Caleb was studying the soldiers with suspicious eyes. "Lieutenant, what's your unit?" 3rd Cavalry, Company B, out of Fort Davis." "Why?" "Just curious. Haven't seen many patrols in this area recently." Something in Caleb's tone made Martha look more closely at the soldiers. Their uniforms were correct, their equipment standard issue. But there was something off about their bearing, something that suggested they weren't quite what they appeared to be. "Mr. Mitchell seems nervous," the lieutenant said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps he has reason to avoid contact with the law. Perhaps I have reason to be careful who I trust." The tension in the air was suddenly thick enough to cut. Martha realized that the soldiers had spread out in a semicircle around them, cutting off escape routes. Their hands were resting casually on their weapons, but the casual nature of the gesture was itself threatening. "You know," the lieutenant continued conversationally, "there's a substantial reward for information leading to Benjamin Torres's capture. But there's an even larger reward for his safe passage to Mexico." Martha's blood turned to ice. These weren't soldiers at all. They were more of Torres's men, disguised in stolen uniforms. "How much?" Caleb asked, his voice betraying nothing. "For Torres, $5,000. For his merchandise safely delivered, $10,000. "That's a lot of money," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Indeed it is. Enough to set a man up for life, assuming he's smart enough to take the deal when it's offered." Martha couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was Caleb actually considering betraying her for money, after everything they had been through, everything. He had risked. "There's just one problem," Caleb said. "What's that?" "I don't like being lied to." Caleb's gun was in his hand so fast that Martha barely saw the movement. The fake lieutenant was reaching for his own weapon when Caleb's bullet took him in the chest, spinning him off his horse. The canyon exploded into chaos. The disguised gunmen were drawing their weapons, but they were caught off guard by the speed of Caleb's attack. His second shot dropped another man before the others could react. "Run!" Caleb shouted to Martha. "Back toward the passage!" Martha stumbled backward, the oversized boots making her clumsy. Around her, gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as Caleb fought a running battle against 6 remaining enemies. She could see him moving from rock to rock, using the scattered boulders as cover, making every shot count. But there were too many of them, and they were spreading out to flank him. Martha realized with horror that he was going to be surrounded. Without thinking, she grabbed a skull from the sand and hurled it at one of the flanking gunmen. The macabre projectile struck him in the head, startling him enough that his shot went wide. Caleb's answering bullet didn't miss. "I told you to run!" Caleb called out. "I'm a terrible listener!" Martha shouted back, grabbing another bone to throw. Despite the deadly situation, she thought she heard him laugh. The gunfight continued for several more minutes, the fake soldiers discovering that Caleb Mitchell's reputation had been earned honestly. When the echoes finally died away, 5 more men lay dead among the ancient bones of Widow's Canyon, but victory had come at a cost. Martha could see blood seeping through Caleb's shirt where a bullet had found its mark. He was still standing, still fighting, but he was hurt. "How bad?" she asked, moving to his side. "I'll live, but we need to move. That shot we heard means someone got away to report our position." Indeed, one of the horses was missing, along with its rider. Somewhere ahead of them, a survivor was racing to tell Benjamin Torres exactly where to find his escaped merchandise. "Can you ride?" Martha asked, looking at the remaining horses. "Can you shoot?" Caleb countered, indicating the rifle one of the dead men had dropped. Martha picked up the weapon, surprised by its weight. "I've never fired a rifle in my life. Point the barrel at what you want to hit and pull the trigger. The details you can learn as we go." They mounted 2 of the cavalry horses, both of them better fed and fresher than the animals they had been riding before. But Martha could see that Caleb was favoring his wounded side, and she suspected his injury was worse. Then he was letting on. "Where now?" she asked as they rode out of the Canyon of Bones. "North and east. There's a town called Cedar Springs about 10 miles from here. If we can reach it, we can get help. Real help this time. And if we can't—" Caleb's smile was grim, but determined. "Then we'll find out just how badly Benjamin Torres wants you back." Behind them, dust clouds on the horizon marked the approach of their pursuers. The race for the border had become a race for Martha's life, and the finish line was still painfully far away. But as they rode across the harsh beauty of the Texas desert, Martha realized something had changed within her. The pampered judge's daughter who had stood at the altar that morning was gone, replaced by someone harder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous. Benjamin Torres had wanted to make her his merchandise. Instead, he had created his own worst enemy, and when they met again, as Martha was now certain they would, she intended to be ready for him. The town of Cedar Springs materialized from the heat shimmer like a mirage, its collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single main street. From a distance, it looked like salvation. Up close, Martha could see it was barely more than a ghost town. Half the buildings stood empty, their windows staring blindly at the desert, and tumbleweeds had taken up residence where busy shops once operated. Not exactly thriving, Martha observed as they approached the outskirts. Caleb's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes remained alert. Railroad bypassed it 3 years ago. Most folks moved on to greener pastures. He winced as his horse stumbled slightly. But there should still be a sheriff and maybe a doctor. The main street was deserted, except for a few horses tied outside what appeared to be the only functioning saloon. A hand-painted sign creaked in the wind. The Last Chance. Martha couldn't help but think the name was appropriate. They dismounted, in front of a small building with Sheriff painted on the window. Caleb swayed slightly as his feet hit the ground, and Martha moved quickly to steady him. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "You're bleeding through your shirt. That's not fine." Before Caleb could argue, the sheriff's office door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades under the desert sun. The star on his vest was tarnished, but still visible. "Folks," he said, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "I'm Sheriff Hawkins. You look like you've had some trouble." "We have," Martha said quickly. "This man has been shot, and we're being pursued by criminals. We need help." Sheriff Hawkins's eyes moved from Martha's ruined wedding dress to Caleb's blood-stained shirt to the military horses they were riding. "Those look like cavalry mounts. You folks wouldn't happen to know what became of their previous riders, would you?" "They weren't cavalry," Caleb said quietly. "They were Torres's men wearing stolen uniforms." The sheriff's expression sharpened. "Torres? Benjamin Torres? You know him? Know of him? Been hunting him for the better part of 2 years." Hawkins stepped closer, studying Caleb's face. "Wait a minute, I know you. You're Caleb Mitchell." Martha felt Caleb tense beside her. "That's a problem, Sheriff." "Depends. Last I heard you'd disappeared. Some folks thought you were dead." "Some folks were wrong." Sheriff Hawkins nodded slowly. "Well, dead or alive, you're welcome in my town if you're fighting Torres. Come on inside. Let's get that wound looked at." The sheriff's office was sparse but clean. Hawkins cleared papers off his desk and gestured for Caleb to sit. "Doc Henderson's been drunk for 3 days, but I've patched up enough bullet holes to know what I'm doing." As the sheriff examined Caleb's wound, Martha found herself studying the wanted posters on the wall. Benjamin Torres's face stared back at her from one of them, the artist having captured something of his cold cruelty. The reward was listed as $2,000, dead or alive. "Bullet went clean through," Hawkins announced. "Missed anything vital, but you've lost a fair amount of blood. You'll need rest and food before you're fit to travel." "We don't have time for rest," Caleb said. "Torres is maybe an hour behind. Us with 12 men. 12 men, you say?" The sheriff finished bandaging the wound and stepped back. "That's more firepower than this town can handle, even with you backing my play." "Then we keep moving," Martha said. "How far is the next town?" 40 miles to Brewster, but that's back toward Torres country. 60 miles to Fort Stockton, but that's rough terrain even for healthy folks." Hawkins looked meaningfully at Caleb's bandaged side. "There's another option," Caleb said quietly. "What?" "We don't run. We make our stand here." Martha stared at him. "Are you insane? You just said this town can't handle 12 men. Not in a straight fight, but if we're smart about it." Caleb moved to the window and looked out at the main street. "This place is perfect for an ambush. Empty buildings for cover, clear fields of fire, only one way in and out." Sheriff Hawkins was nodding slowly. "It could work. Turn their numbers against them in a confined space." "Are you both crazy?" Martha demanded. "We're talking about 3 people against 12 killers." "4 people," a new voice said from the doorway. They turned to see a woman entering the office. She was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that suggested she had seen more than her share of trouble. She wore a practical dress and carried a shotgun with the easy familiarity of long practice. "Mrs. Patterson," Sheriff Hawkins said, "didn't expect to see you today. Heard horses coming in fast and figured there might be trouble. I'm right, aren't I?" "This is Martha Caldwell," the sheriff said, "and Caleb Mitchell. They're running from Benjamin Torres." Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. Torres? That bastard killed my husband 2 years ago, shot him down in cold blood over a water rights dispute. She looked at Martha and Caleb with new interest. If you're planning to make a fight of it, then count me in. Ma'am, Martha said, this isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. Torres has been terrorizing this part of Texas long enough. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him. 5 people, another voice added. This time it was a younger man, perhaps 25, with the calloused hands of a working cowboy. Name's Jake Morrison. I tend bar at the last chance, but I can handle a rifle when needed. This is madness. Martha said, you don't even know us. Don't need to, Morrison said simply. Sheriff Hawkins says you're fighting Torres. That's good enough for me. Sheriff Hawkins moved to a gun rack and began distributing weapons. Jake, you take the hotel. Mrs. Patterson, you know the general store better than anyone. That's your position. Mitchell, you and I will take opposite ends of the main street. What about me? Martha asked. You stay in the jail cell where it's safe, Hawkins said. Absolutely not. Martha's voice carried an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. I've been running from this man all night. I'm not hiding in a cell while other people fight my battles. You don't know how to use a gun, Caleb pointed out. Then teach me, quickly. Caleb studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Sheriff, do you have any pistols that aren't too heavy for a woman? Hawkins produced a .32 caliber revolver from his desk drawer. This was my wife's. She's been dead 5 years, but I keep it cleaned and loaded out of habit. Martha took the weapon, surprised by its weight. Show me how to use it. The lesson was necessarily brief. Point, aim, squeeze the trigger gently, don't jerk it. Keep both eyes open. Remember that the gun will kick upward when fired. Simple enough in theory, terrifying in practice. Where do you want me? Martha asked when the impromptu lesson was finished. The church tower, Caleb said after a moment's thought. Good view of the whole street, and if things go badly, it's the easiest place to defend. They scattered to their positions as dust clouds appeared on the southern horizon. Benjamin Torres was coming, and he was bringing his entire remaining force. Martha climbed the narrow stairs to the church bell tower, her heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. From her elevated position, she could see the entire main street, spread out below. Sheriff Hawkins had taken cover behind a water trough at the north end of town. Caleb was positioned behind the blacksmith's forge at the south end. Mrs. Patterson was barely visible in the shadows of the general store, and Jake Morrison had disappeared into the hotel. The waiting was the worst part. Martha could see the approaching riders now, 12 men led by Benjamin Torres himself. Even at a distance, she recognized his arrogant bearing, the way he sat his horse like a conquering king, surveying his domain. They rode into Cedar Springs at a steady walk, their eyes constantly moving, alert for trouble. Benjamin knew this was too easy. A ghost town made the perfect place for an ambush, and he was too experienced to be caught off guard. "Mitchell," he called out when they reached the center of the main street. "I know you're here. There's no point hiding." Silence was the only answer. "I'm a reasonable man," Benjamin continued. "Return my property and I'll let you ride away. You have my word." This time Caleb's voice rang out from his concealment. "Your word isn't worth the air you waste speaking." "It, Torres," Benjamin's face twisted with rage. "You always were too proud for your own good, Mitchell. It's going to get you killed." "Maybe, but not today." Benjamin raised his hand and his men began to spread out, moving toward the buildings that lined the street. They were experienced fighters, and they knew how to clear a town building by building, but they had underestimated their opponents. Sheriff Hawkins fired first, his rifle barking from behind the water trough. One of Torres's men tumbled from his saddle, stone dead. The battle for Cedar Springs had begun. Gunfire erupted from every direction as the defenders opened up from their concealed positions. Torres's men, caught in the open on the main street, scrambled for cover wherever they could find it. Martha watched from her perch in the bell tower, the pistol heavy in her hands. Below her, muzzle flashes lit the gathering dusk like deadly fireflies. She could see Benjamin Torres himself taking cover behind an overturned wagon, shouting orders to his men. One of the gunmen had made it to the base of the church and was trying to force the door. Without thinking, Martha leaned out of the tower window and aimed the pistol downward. The gun bucked in her hands, the sound deafening in the confined space of the tower. Her shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the gunman dive for better cover. "Not bad for a beginner," Caleb's voice carried across the street. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Gradually, the odds began to shift. Torres's men were better armed and more experienced, but they were caught in a crossfire with no easy escape route. Mrs. Patterson's shotgun boomed from the general store, and another of Torres's men went down. Jake Morrison's rifle cracked repeatedly from the hotel, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. But the defenders were taking casualties too. Martha saw Sheriff Hawkins stagger as a bullet creased his shoulder. One of the hotel windows exploded in a shower of glass as Torres's men concentrated their fire on Morrison's position. And then, just as it seemed the battle might turn against them, Martha saw something that made her blood run cold. Benjamin Torres was no longer behind the overturned wagon. She scanned the street frantically, trying to locate him. There, moving, along the side of the church, using the building's bulk to shield himself from the other defenders. He was coming for her. Martha gripped the pistol with both hands and waited. She could hear his boots on the wooden stairs now, climbing steadily toward the bell tower. Each footstep brought him closer to her hiding place. The door to the tower burst open, and Benjamin Torres stepped through, his gun already drawn. He was dust-covered and bleeding from a graze on his cheek, but his eyes burned with the fury of a man who refused to be denied. "Hello, my dear wife," he said with that terrible smile. "Time to come home." Martha stared down the barrel of Benjamin Torres's gun, her own weapon suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in her trembling hands. The bell tower that had seemed like a sanctuary moments before now felt like a tomb. "Put the gun down, Martha," Benjamin said, his voice deceptively calm despite the chaos raging in the street below. "You're not a killer. We both know that." "I wouldn't be so sure," Martha replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "People change." Benjamin laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. "Indeed they do, but not that. Not that fast. You're still the sheltered judge's daughter who fainted at the sight of blood when you were 12. The memory hit Martha like a physical blow. She had been 12 when she witnessed a barroom brawl that ended with a man's throat cut. She had indeed fainted, and the story had become family legend. How could Benjamin possibly know that detail? Surprised? Benjamin's smile widened at her expression. "I've been planning this for over a year, my dear. I know everything about you. Your favorite books, your childhood fears, the scar on your knee from when you fell off your pony. I know that you bite your lip when you're nervous, just like you're doing now." Martha realized with horror that she was indeed biting her lip. She forced herself to stop, but the damage was done. Benjamin had demonstrated just how thoroughly he had studied his prey. "Your father was surprisingly helpful," Benjamin continued. "Amazing how much a man will reveal about his daughter when he's deep in his cups and drowning in gambling debts. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every way to break you down and rebuild you into something useful." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Then, how do I know about the nightmares you had for months after your mother died? How do I know you still sleep with a lamp burning because you're afraid of the dark? How do I know you've never kissed a man because you've been waiting for true love?" Each revelation was like a knife twist. These were secrets Martha had shared with no one except her father during moments of childhood vulnerability. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. "He sold me," she whispered. "He sold you beautifully. Every detail, Every intimate moment, every private fear. By the time we met at the altar, I knew you better than you know yourself." Outside, the gunfight continued, but the sound seemed distant and unreal. Martha's entire world had narrowed to this tower, this moment, this man who had orchestrated the destruction of everything she had believed about her life. "But you made one mistake," she said. "What's that?" "You assumed I would stay the same person you bought from my father." Before Benjamin could react, Martha threw herself sideways, squeezing the trigger as she moved. The .32 caliber pistol barked, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Benjamin's return shot splintered the wooden wall where she had been standing. Martha rolled behind the massive bronze bell, her heart hammering so hard she was sure Benjamin could hear it. The bell would stop bullets, but it also trapped her in the corner of the tower with no escape route. "Clever girl," Benjamin called out. "But now what? You have maybe 4 shots left, and I have time on my side. Eventually, you'll have to come out." He was right, and they both knew it. But Martha had learned something important in the past 24 hours. Sometimes survival wasn't about having good options. Sometimes it was about making the best of terrible ones. "Tell me something, Benjamin," she called out, trying to keep him talking while she figured out her next move. "Why me? With all your connections, all your money, you could have bought any woman you wanted. Why go through the charade of marriage?" "Because you weren't just any woman. You were Judge Caldwell's daughter, the perfect cover for my operations. Who would suspect the wife of a respected cattle baron? You would have been my passport to respectability, my shield against suspicion. Would it have been? Oh, you still will be, just not in the way I originally planned. You see, after tonight's unfortunate events, I'll be the grieving widower. My beautiful wife, tragically killed by the notorious outlaw Caleb Mitchell during a daring rescue attempt that went wrong. The authorities will be very sympathetic to a man who has lost so much." Martha felt ice form in her stomach. "You're going to kill me and blame Caleb, eventually. But first, you're going to serve a different purpose, bait." As if summoned by Benjamin's words, Caleb's voice rang out from the street below. "Torres, let her go! Your fight is with me!" Benjamin moved to the tower window and called down. "Mitchell, how noble of you to offer yourself, but I'm afraid the terms have changed. Name your terms. You throw down your weapons and surrender. In exchange, I'll give you 5 minutes alone with your lady friend before I kill you both." Generous, don't you think? The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire. Martha knew what Caleb was thinking, the same thing she was thinking. There had to be another way, but before either of them could act, the decision was taken out of their hands. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the night air like a whip crack. "Torres, you yellow-bellied snake! Fight someone your own size!" Benjamin's attention shifted to the window as he tried to locate the source of the taunt. It was the opening Martha had been waiting for. She rolled out from behind the bell, bringing her gun up as she moved. Benjamin spun back toward her, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Martha's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying across the tower floor. Benjamin staggered against the wall, clutching his wounded shoulder. But his eyes still burned with rage, and Martha knew he was far from finished. "You little bitch," he snarled. "You think one lucky shot changes anything?" He lunged toward his fallen gun, but Martha was already moving. She kicked the weapon away, sending it skittering across the wooden floor to fall through a gap in the boards. Benjamin straightened, his good hand moving to a knife at his belt. "I'm going to enjoy cutting you apart piece by piece." "Not if I shoot you first. Go ahead. Pull the trigger." Benjamin's smile was insane now, all pretense of civilization stripped away. "But remember, I'm the only one who knows where your father really is. Kill me, and you'll never see him alive again." Martha's finger hesitated on the trigger. "What are you talking about? My father is in Millfield." "Your father is in a cell in Mexico, awaiting execution for crimes against the state. Trumped up." And charges, of course, but very convincing. The only thing keeping him alive is my influence with certain officials. You're lying. Am I? Why do you think he was so eager to arrange our marriage? Why do you think he looked so guilty at the wedding? He knew he was trading his daughter's freedom for his own life. The revelation hit Martha like a physical blow. Her father's strange behavior, his guilty expressions, his insistence on the marriage despite her objections. It all made terrible sense now. Even if that's true, she said finally, I can't let you go. You'll destroy too many other lives. Then, you're willing to sacrifice your father for your principles? How noble, how utterly stupid! Benjamin tensed to spring, the knife glinting in his hand. But as he moved, another gunshot echoed through the tower. Benjamin Torres stopped mid-lunge, a look of surprise spreading across his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him, Caleb Mitchell stood in the tower doorway, smoke still curling from the barrel of his Colt. His face was pale from blood loss and exertion, but his gun hand was rock steady. Should have watched the stairs, Caleb said quietly. Benjamin Torres, the man who had terrorized half of Texas, crumpled to the floor of the church bell tower. With his last breath, he whispered, Your father, Mexico City, prison. Then he was gone, and the sudden silence seemed deafening. After the chaos of the past few minutes, Martha lowered her gun, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. How did you get up here? The street was full of his men, was being the operative phrase. Your friends down there are better fighters than they look. Jake Morrison used to be cavalry before he became a bartender. Mrs. Patterson learned to shoot while defending her homestead against Comanche raids. Sheriff Hawkins has been dealing with outlaws for 20 years. They're all right, banged up but breathing. Can't say the same for Torres's men. Martha looked down at Benjamin's body, feeling a complex mixture of relief, revulsion, and unexpected sadness. He said he has my father imprisoned in Mexico City. Probably another lie. Torres was good at psychological warfare. But what if it wasn't? What if my father really is in danger? Caleb holstered his weapon and moved to the window, scanning the street below. Then we'll deal with that when we know for sure. Right now, we need to focus on getting you somewhere. Safe! Safe? Martha almost laughed. I don't even know what that means anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. My father, my home, my future, all of it built on deception and crime. Not all of it, Caleb said quietly. What do you mean? You. The person you've become over the past day. That's real. The courage you've shown, the strength you've found, the way you stood up to Torres, that's who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Martha looked at him with new eyes. Throughout their desperate flight, she had been so focused on survival that she hadn't really thought about what came next. But now, with Torres dead and in immediate danger, the future stretched before her like an uncharted desert. What happens now? She asked. Now you choose. You can go back to Millfield, try to rebuild your old life. You can head east to the big cities, start over somewhere Torres's reputation can't touch you. Or what? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight, filtering through the tower windows. Or you can help me finish what we started here. What do you mean? Torres is dead, but his organization isn't. There are dozens of men out there who worked for him, operations that will continue without his leadership. Someone needs to clean up the mess he left behind. Someone like you, someone like us. The simple phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond hunting criminals. Martha realized that somewhere during their flight across the desert, something had changed between them. The mysterious gunfighter and the sheltered judge's daughter had become something new together, partners in ways that had nothing to do with necessity and everything to do with choice. It would be dangerous, she said. more dangerous than what we've already been through. It would mean giving up any chance of a normal life. Was your old life really so normal? Or was it just a comfortable cage? Martha thought about the wedding dress she had put on that morning a lifetime ago. She thought about the future that had been planned for her, a future built on lies and bought with blood money. She thought about the woman she had been 12 hours ago, and the woman she was now. "When do we start?" she asked. Caleb's rare smile transformed his entire face. "We already have." From the street below, Sheriff Hawkins called up to them. "Everything all right up there?" "Everything's fine, Sheriff," Martha called back. "Better than fine." As they climbed down from the bell tower, Martha realized that the chains Benjamin Torres had planned for her were finally truly broken. But more than that, she had discovered something she never would have found in drawing rooms and tea parties. She had found herself. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had found something else worth fighting for. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions around Cedar Springs, but for the first time in her life, Martha Caldwell wasn't afraid of the horizon. She was ready to ride toward it, whatever it might bring. The silent rancher was silent no more, and the bride in chains had become a woman, free to choose her own destiny. Their real adventure was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the gunfight in Cedar Springs, and the desert town had slowly begun to show signs of new life. Word had spread that Benjamin Torres was dead, and with his reign of terror ended, merchants and settlers were starting to trickle back into the region. The Last Chance Saloon now served travelers heading west to California, and Sheriff Hawkins had hired 2 deputies to help keep the peace. Martha stood on the porch of the small house she had rented on the edge of town, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She wore practical clothes now, leather boots, dark riding pants, and a cotton shirt that allowed for freedom of movement. The .32 caliber pistol that had belonged to the sheriff's late wife rode in a holster at her hip, as natural as breathing. "Early morning for deep thinking," Caleb said, emerging from the house with 2 cups of coffee. Martha accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "I was thinking about my father." It was a conversation they had been avoiding for weeks, but it hung between them like a storm cloud on the horizon. Despite their best efforts to verify Benjamin's claims about Judge Caldwell's fate, they had found no concrete evidence of his whereabouts. The Mexican authorities claimed no knowledge of an imprisoned American judge, but that could mean anything or nothing. "Still planning to go to Mexico City?" Caleb asked. "I have to know the truth, even if—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what she meant. Even if her father was dead. Even if he had been complicit in Benjamin's schemes. She needed to know. It's dangerous territory. Torres might be dead, but his connections run deep on both sides of the border. "Then I'll be careful." "We'll be careful," Caleb corrected. "You don't think I'm letting you ride into Mexico alone, do you?" Martha smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you." Caleb's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, we made a deal. Partners, remember?" The partnership had evolved over the past 3 months into something neither of them had quite expected. They had tracked down several of Torres's former lieutenants, disrupting smuggling operations and freeing captives destined for the slave markets. Martha had proved herself repeatedly, her quick thinking and determination making her an invaluable ally. But there had been other changes too, subtle shifts in their relationship that neither of them spoke about directly. The way Caleb's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way her heart raced when he rode back from a scouting mission, the careful distance they maintained, as if acknowledging what was happening between them might somehow break the spell. "There's something else," Martha said, pulling a telegram from her pocket. "This came in on yesterday's wire." Caleb read the message, his expression darkening. "Thomas Brennan wants to meet in Laredo." "You know him?" "Know of him. He was Torres's contact in the Texas Rangers. If this message is genuine, he might have information about your father, and if it's a trap, then we spring it carefully. Martha studied Caleb's face, noting the tension around his eyes. There was something he wasn't telling her, something about Thomas Brennan that went beyond professional concern. "What aren't you saying?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape. "Brennan is the reason I disappeared. 3 years ago, he set up an ambush that was supposed to kill me, but it killed someone else instead." "Who?" "My younger brother, Daniel. He was wearing my coat, riding my usual horse. Brennan's men shot him down in cold blood, thinking he was me." The revelation hit Martha like a physical blow. "Oh, Caleb, I'm so sorry." "Daniel was everything I wasn't. Good, honest, optimistic. He believed in justice, in doing the right thing. When he died because of my enemies," Caleb's voice trailed off, "I couldn't handle being responsible for any more deaths, so I disappeared. But you came back. You saved me. Because I finally realized that hiding from my past wasn't honoring Daniel's memory, it was wasting it." Martha reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work and harder choices. "If Brennan is responsible for your brother's death, why would he want to meet now? Maybe he's developed a conscience. Maybe he's scared with Torres dead and his protection gone, or maybe he wants to finish what he started 3 years ago. Then we don't go. Yes, we do. But we got prepared." 2 days later, they rode into Laredo as the sun was setting behind them. The border town was a mixture of Mexican and American influences, with adobe buildings sitting next to wooden frontier structures. The Rio Grande flowed lazily past the town, marking the international boundary that had been the source of so much conflict and opportunity. They had arranged to meet Brennan at a cantina called El Corazon Negro, the Black Heart. The name seemed appropriate for a meeting with a corrupt lawman. "He's already here," Caleb said as they dismounted outside the cantina. "That's his horse at the hitching post." Martha checked her pistol one final time. Over the past 3 months, she had become proficient with the weapon, though she still hoped never to use it in anger again. The cantina was dimly lit and filled with smoke from cheap cigars. Most of the patrons were Mexican laborers and American drifters, the kind of men who asked no questions and expected none in return. Thomas Brennan sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. He was older than Martha had expected, perhaps 50, with graying hair and the soft look of a man who had spent too many years behind a desk. But his eyes were alert, and she could see the bulge of a shoulder holster under his jacket. "Mitchell," Brennan said as they approached his table, "you look good for a dead man." "Disappointed?" Caleb asked, pulling out a chair for Martha before sitting down himself. "Relieved, actually. What happened to your brother wasn't personal, it was business, and it was a mistake. A mistake that cost Daniel his life. A mistake I've regretted every day since." Brennan's voice carried what sounded like genuine remorse. "I've been wanting to make amends." "How do you make amends for murder?" "By helping you find what you're looking for." Brennan turned to Martha. "You're Judge Caldwell's daughter, aren't you? Torres's supposed widow?" "I am." "Your father is alive. He's being held in a private prison outside Mexico City, but not by the Mexican government. It's a facility run by Torres's associates, men who are very unhappy about their leader's death." Martha felt her heart leap. "You're certain he's alive?" "As of last week, yes. But his situation is precarious. The men holding him blame him for Torres's death. They think he should have warned them about the wedding, about you." "That's ridiculous. My father didn't know." "Didn't he?" Brennan's expression was grave. "Mrs. Caldwell, your father was deeper in Torres's organization than you realize. He wasn't just a corrupt judge taking bribes. He was Torres's partner." The words hit Martha like a slap. "That's impossible." "I'm afraid it's not. Your father helped Torres identify targets, provided legal cover for his operations, and shared in the profits. The marriage wasn't just about paying debts. It was about cementing a business partnership. Caleb leaned forward. "Do you have proof of this?" Brennan reached into his jacket slowly, producing a leather portfolio. "Letters in your father's handwriting, financial records showing payments from Torres's accounts, testimony from prisoners who worked for the organization." Martha opened the portfolio with trembling hands. The evidence was damning, page after page of correspondence between her father and Benjamin Torres, discussing everything from bribing other officials to planning kidnappings. Her father's familiar handwriting spelling out acts of casual cruelty and calculated greed. "I don't understand," she whispered. "The man who wrote these letters, this isn't the father I knew." "People are rarely who we think they are," Brennan said gently. "Your father loved you, I'm sure of that, but love doesn't erase the choices he made." "Why are you telling us this?" Caleb asked suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Torres's organization is trying to regroup under new leadership. They're planning something big, a raid on a silver shipment worth over $100,000. If they succeed, they'll have enough money to rebuild everything Torres created. And you want us to stop them. I want you to help me stop them. In exchange, I'll help you rescue Judge Caldwell." Martha looked up from the damning documents. "Why should we trust you? You tried to have Caleb killed." "Because I'm tired of being on the wrong side, because Torres's death proved that these men can be stopped, and because—" Brennan hesitated, then continued, "because I have a daughter. About your age, Mrs. Caldwell. If she were in your situation, I'd want someone to help her." The cantina had grown quieter as the evening progressed, but Martha was barely aware of her surroundings. The revelation about her father's true role in Torres's organization had shattered her remaining illusions about her old life. "Where is this silver shipment supposed to be?" Caleb asked. "It's traveling from a mine in Chihuahua to banks in San Antonio. The route takes it through Paso del Diablo, Devil's Pass, in 5 days. Perfect place for an ambush." "How many men are we talking about?" "Maybe 20, led by a man named Vasquez. He was Torres's most trusted lieutenant, and now he's trying to claim the crown." Martha closed the portfolio, her decision made. "If we help you stop this raid, you'll help us." "Rescue my father? You have my word." "Your word isn't worth much, considering your history," Caleb said bluntly. "Then consider this," Brennan replied. "I'm offering you a chance to end Torres's legacy permanently. Stop this raid, capture Vasquez, and the organization dies with him. Isn't that worth the risk?" Martha looked at Caleb, seeing her own conflicted feelings reflected in his eyes. They both knew Brennan couldn't be fully trusted, but the opportunity he was offering might not come again. "We'll need more information," Caleb said finally. "Maps, guard schedules, escape routes. I have everything you need." Brennan smiled, for the first time since they had sat down. "But we'll need to move fast. Vasquez's men are already in position." As they left the cantina an hour later, Martha felt the weight of another impossible choice. Her father was alive, but imprisoned, by men who blamed him for their leader's death. The only way to save him was to trust a corrupt lawman whose word was worth nothing, and to risk their lives stopping a crime that might prevent even greater ones. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked Caleb as they walked back to their hotel. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know we can't turn our backs on people who need help, even if one of them is a man who doesn't deserve it. My father made his choices. Maybe I should let him live with the consequences." "Maybe, but you'll have to live with that choice too. The question is, which decision will you be able to face in the mirror tomorrow?" Martha knew he was right. Whatever her father had done, whatever crimes he had committed, she couldn't abandon him, not when there was still a chance to save him. 5 days to Devil's Pass, she said. 5 days, Caleb agreed. As they prepared for what might be their most dangerous mission yet, Martha realized that the woman who had stood at the altar 3 months ago would never have made this choice. That woman would have been paralyzed by the moral complexity, overwhelmed by the violence and betrayal. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone harder and more pragmatic. Someone who understood that in a world of difficult choices, sometimes the best you could do was choose the path that let you sleep at night, even if that path led straight through the heart of danger. Devil's Pass lived up to its name. The narrow canyon cut through the mountains like a wound, its walls rising 300 feet on either side to form natural ramparts that had witnessed countless ambushes over the decades. Ancient petroglyphs scarred the rock faces, depicting scenes of warfare and death that seemed to prophesy the violence about to unfold. Martha crouched behind a boulder near the canyon's entrance, her rifle steady in her hands as she watched the silver convoy approach through her spyglass. 6 heavily laden wagons rumbled along the dusty trail, escorted by 20 Mexican soldiers whose bright uniforms made them easy targets against the red stone backdrop. "Right on schedule," Caleb whispered. From his position 15 feet away, Vasquez's men are already in the canyon. I count at least 18 rifles. 3 days of hard riding had brought them here ahead of both the convoy and the bandits. Brennan had proved as good as his word, providing detailed maps and intelligence that allowed them to position themselves perfectly. The question now was whether his promise about helping rescue Judge Caldwell would prove equally reliable. "Remember the plan," Brennan's voice carried softly from his concealment higher up the slope. "We let Vasquez's men start the ambush, then hit them from behind, while they're focused on the convoy." It was a risky strategy that depended on precise timing and no small amount of luck. But it was their best chance to capture Vasquez alive, and a living Vasquez was the only currency they had to trade for Martha's father. The convoy entered the pass, wheels crunching on loose stone as the oxen strained against their loads. Martha could see the lead wagon's driver, a weathered Mexican man, who kept glancing nervously at the canyon walls. He knew this was dangerous ground, but there was no other route through the mountains that could accommodate the heavy wagons. High above, hidden among the rocks, Vasquez's men waited like vultures. Martha had studied their leader through her spyglass earlier. A stocky man with a black beard and gold teeth who wore his arrogance like a badge. He was everything Benjamin Torres had been, but without the intelligence or subtlety that had made Torres so dangerous. The first wagon had almost reached the narrowest part of the canyon when Vasquez made his move. A rifle cracked from the eastern wall, and the lead driver pitched forward, crimson spreading across his white shirt. The ambush had begun. Chaos erupted as bandits opened fire from both sides of the canyon. The Mexican soldiers scrambled for cover, but they were caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run. Horses screamed and reared as bullets whined off the canyon walls. The carefully planned convoy became a scene of panic and slaughter within seconds. "Now," Caleb said, and rose from concealment. The surprise attack from behind caught Vasquez's men completely off guard. Martha's rifle spoke repeatedly, each shot carefully aimed at the muzzle flashes that revealed the bandits' positions. Beside her, Caleb worked his way systematically along the western wall, his colt barking death with mechanical precision. Brennan proved to be as capable as he had claimed, his shots from the higher ground forcing several bandits to abandon their positions and seek new cover. But the fighting was fierce, and Martha realized with growing horror that they might not be able to save the convoy, even if they won. Half the soldiers were already down, and the survivors were running low on ammunition. The silver wagons themselves had become the center of a deadly triangle, with bandits firing down from above, while Martha's group attacked from the rear, and the remaining soldiers held their ground in the middle. "Vasquez is getting away," Brennan shouted over the gunfire. Martha swung her spyglass toward the canyon's far end and saw the bandit leader spurring his horse toward escape. If he got away, they would lose their only leverage for rescuing her. Father. Without thinking, Martha broke from cover and ran toward the horses they had hidden near the canyon entrance. Behind her, she could hear Caleb shouting her name, but she didn't stop. This was their chance, possibly their only chance, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Her horse was a good one, fast and sure-footed on the treacherous canyon floor. She pushed the animal hard, weaving between scattered rocks and fallen bodies as she raced after Vasquez. The bandit leader had a head start, but his horse was carrying more weight, and Martha was lighter and more desperate. The chase led out of Devil's Pass and across a stretch of open desert dotted with sagebrush and scattered boulders. Vasquez looked back and saw her gaining, his gold teeth flashing in a snarl as he drew his pistol and fired wild shots over his shoulder. Martha flattened herself against her horse's neck, feeling one bullet buzz past her ear. She had her own pistol in her hand now, but the range was too great and both horses were moving too fast for accurate shooting. They raced across the desert for what felt like miles, Vasquez's horse beginning to falter as the pace took its toll. Martha was closing the gap when suddenly the bandit leader reined in and spun to face her, his rifle in his hands. The shot boomed across the desert, and Martha felt her horse stumble beneath her. The animal had been hit, but its momentum carried them forward even as it began to fall. Martha kicked free of the stirrups and rolled as the horse went down, coming up with her pistol ready. Vasquez was working the lever of his rifle, trying to chamber another round, when Martha's .32 caliber bullet took him in the chest. He staggered backward, surprise replacing arrogance on his weathered features. "You shot me," he said with what sounded like genuine amazement. "I did," Martha confirmed, keeping her gun trained on him as she approached. "And I'll shoot you again if you don't drop that rifle." Vasquez let the weapon fall from nerveless fingers. Blood was seeping through his shirt, but the wound didn't look immediately fatal. "Who are you, Senora? You fight like a man, but you're too pretty to be a man." "I'm someone whose father you're holding prisoner, someone who wants him back." Recognition dawned in the bandit's eyes. "Ah, sí, la viuda de Torres, the widow of Benjamin Torres," he laughed, blood flecking his lips. "Your husband is dead, but his legacy lives on." "His legacy dies with you, does it?" "There are others, Senora. Men who learned from Torres, who will carry on his work." "You think killing one man ends everything?" Martha studied his face, seeing the truth in his eyes. Vasquez was right. There would always be others to take his place, but that didn't mean she could stop fighting them. "Maybe not," she said. "But it ends your part in it." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Caleb was riding hard across the desert, his face grim with concern. Behind him, Martha could see Brennan following at a more leisurely pace. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked as he dismounted. "I'm fine. My horse took a bullet, but I'm uninjured." Caleb looked at the wounded Vasquez, then at Martha. "Good shooting. Lucky. Shooting. Another few inches, and he would have killed me." Brennan arrived and surveyed the scene with professional interest. "Vasquez alive is worth more than Vasquez dead. We can trade him for your father." "If you're telling the truth about the exchange," Martha said. She had learned to trust carefully. "I am. The meet is arranged for tomorrow night, just across the border in Mexico. They want Vasquez back badly enough to deal." As they bound Vasquez's wounds and prepared him for transport, Martha found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been a sheltered judge's daughter, whose biggest worry was choosing the right dress for church. Now she was standing in the desert with a smoking gun in her hand, having just captured one of the most wanted men in Texas. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. Not just the practical skills she had learned, how to shoot, how to track, how to survive in hostile territory, but the fundamental change in who she was. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been replaced by a cold determination that surprised even her. The exchange took place the following evening at an abandoned church just south of the border. Martha and Caleb waited in the shadows while Brennan approached the building with their prisoner. Vasquez was conscious but weak, his hands bound and his movements carefully watched. The men who emerged from the church were a mixture of Mexican bandits and American outlaws, the remnants of Torres's organization trying to hold together without their leader. They looked nervous, constantly scanning the darkness for signs of a trap. "You brought company," their leader said, eyeing Brennan suspiciously. "Insurance," Brennan replied calmly. "You have something I want. I have something you want. Let's make the trade and be done with it. Where is Judge Caldwell?" Two men emerged from the church, supporting a third figure between them. Even in the dim moonlight, Martha could see that her father had aged years in the months since she had last seen him. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face gaunt from poor food and worry, but he was alive and he was walking under his own power. That was more than Martha had dared hope for. "The trade," Brennan said. "Your leader for the judge." At the same time, no tricks. The exchange was tense, both groups watching each other carefully as the prisoners walked toward the center of the clearing. Martha held her breath as her father stumbled forward, his eyes searching the darkness as if he sensed her presence. Then suddenly he was free, and Vasquez was in the hands of his men. The bandit leader looked back at Martha's hiding place and smiled. "This is not over, Senora," he called out. "Torres had many friends. They will remember you." "Let them come," Martha replied, stepping into the moonlight. "I'll be waiting." Judge Caldwell looked at his daughter as if she were a ghost. The elegant young woman he remembered had been replaced by someone harder, more capable, wearing men's clothes and carrying weapons with easy familiarity. "Martha? Is that really you?" "Hello, Papa." They held each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Martha could feel how thin he had become, could smell the fear and desperation that clung to him like smoke. But underneath it all, he was still her father. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything, for what I did, for what I became. You deserved better." "We'll talk about it later," Martha said gently. "Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe." As they rode back toward the border, Judge Caldwell told them about his imprisonment. The conditions had been harsh but not deliberately cruel. His captors had kept him alive as a bargaining chip, insurance against future problems with the law. "They blamed me for Torres's death," he said. "Thought I should have warned them somehow." "Should you have?" Martha asked quietly. Her father was silent for a long time. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I was in so deep, I couldn't see a way out. Torres owned me completely. My debts, my reputation, my future. Fighting him seemed impossible." "But you didn't warn him about the wedding." "No. Whatever I had become, I couldn't bring myself to actively participate in your destruction. That was the one line I couldn't cross. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small sign that the father she had loved was still somewhere inside, the broken man riding beside her. They reached the border as dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Martha of her wedding day a lifetime ago. But this sunrise felt different, just not an ending, but a beginning. "What happens now?" Judge Caldwell asked as they paused at the Rio Grande. Martha looked at Caleb, seeing the question in his eyes as well. They had rescued her father, broken up Torres's organization, and brought some measure of justice to a lawless land. But there would always be more work to do, more wrongs to right. "Now we go home," she said, "all of us, and after that—" Martha smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. "After that, we see what tomorrow brings." As they crossed the river into Texas, Martha realized that the chains Benjamin Torres had tried to bind her with had been broken long ago. In their place, she had forged new bonds of partnership, of purpose, of chosen family rather than inherited obligation. The silent rancher rode beside her, no longer silent, no longer alone. The corrupt judge followed behind them, seeking redemption for crimes that could never be fully forgiven. And Martha herself, the bride who had once worn chains, now wore the freedom that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The desert stretched endlessly around them, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. But Martha Caldwell was no longer afraid of the horizon. She had learned to make her own destiny, one choice at a time. 2 weeks later, they sat around a campfire outside the town of Del Rio, the flames casting dancing shadows across their weathered faces. Judge Caldwell had gained back some weight and color, though the haunted look in his eyes suggested the psychological scars would take longer to heal than the physical ones. "There's something I need to tell you both," Brennan said, breaking the comfortable silence. He had been riding with them since the exchange, claiming he had nowhere else to go. "About the silver shipment we intercepted." Martha looked up from cleaning her rifle. "What about it?" "It wasn't just silver. Hidden in the bottom of the wagons were documents, correspondence between Torres's network and officials in Washington. Evidence of corruption that goes all the way to the territorial governor's office." Caleb set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "How high up does it go?" "High enough to hang a dozen men if the evidence ever sees daylight. High enough to explain why Torres operated with such impunity for so long." Judge Caldwell stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "What kind of evidence?" "Payoff schedules, voting records, agreements to look the other way on specific crimes. Your friend Torres was more than just a criminal. He was the center of a web that infected half the territorial government." Martha felt a familiar chill. "And now that he's dead, those same officials are going to want that evidence destroyed." "Along with anyone who's seen it," Brennan confirmed grimly. "Which includes us," Caleb said, "all of us." The implications settled over the camp like a shroud. Martha had thought their troubles were over with Torres dead and her father rescued. Instead, they had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than any single outlaw's empire. "Where are these documents now?" she asked. "Hidden, but not permanently. I have contacts in the Federal Marshal Service, honest men who've been trying to root out corruption for years. If we can get the evidence for them, we can bring down the whole network," Judge Caldwell finished. "Clean house from top to bottom." "It won't be easy," Brennan warned. "These men have resources, connections, and private armies. They'll kill anyone who threatens their operations." Martha stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out at the star-filled sky. Behind her, she could hear the men discussing routes and safe houses, debating the best way to transport dangerous evidence across hostile territory. But she was thinking about something else entirely. About the woman she had been 6 months ago and the woman she had become. About the choices that had brought her to this moment, standing in the desert darkness with the weight of territorial justice on her shoulders. "We have to do it," she said, turning back to face the others. "Martha," her father said gently, "this isn't your fight. You've done enough, more than enough." "When does it stop being someone else's fight?" she asked. "When good people are murdered? When children are sold into slavery? When corrupt officials profit from misery while honest folks suffer?" Caleb smiled, and she saw pride in his expression. "She's right. This is everyone's fight, whether they know it or not." "The territorial capital is 200 miles northeast," Brennan said, "through country controlled by men who want us dead. Even if we make it, there's no guarantee the marshals can protect us." "There are no guarantees in this life," Martha replied, "but that doesn't mean we stop trying to do what's right." Judge Caldwell looked at his daughter with wonder and regret warring in his eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "When I learned that wisdom comes from making hard choices, not avoiding them." They broke camp before dawn, riding hard across terrain that shifted from desert to grassland to rocky hills as they moved northeast toward the territorial capital. The documents were hidden in a specially constructed compartment in Caleb's saddlebags, protected by oiled leather and wrapped in silk to guard against moisture. On the second day, they picked up their first tale, two riders maintaining a careful distance but matching their pace exactly. By the third day, there were four. By the fourth, Martha counted at least 6 men following them, and probably more that she couldn't see. "They're not attacking," Caleb observed as they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods beside a small creek. "Just watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Martha asked. "For us to reach the capital. Then they'll move to stop us from making contact with the marshals." "Or they're waiting for reinforcements," Brennan added darkly. "These men don't like fair fights." That night Martha took the first watch while the others slept. She sat with her back to a large tree, rifle across her knees, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were planning their deaths. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt only a cold determination. She had come too far to be stopped now. Near midnight, she heard movement in the brush beyond the firelight. Not the casual rustling of small animals, but the deliberate sounds of someone trying to move quietly. Martha eased back the hammer of her rifle and waited. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, a man with a knife in his hand, creeping toward where Caleb lay sleeping. Martha's rifle spoke once, the sound echoing across the landscape like thunder. The would-be assassin crumpled without a sound. The camp erupted into activity as the others woke, weapons in hand. But the immediate threat was over, and their pursuers had melted back into the night. "Professional," Caleb said, examining the dead man's equipment. "Good knife, quality boots, military training. These aren't ordinary outlaws." "Mercenaries," Brennan agreed. "Hired killers working for the corruption network." "How many more?" Judge Caldwell asked. "Does it matter?" Martha replied, surprising herself with the hardness in her voice. "However many come, we'll deal with them." The fifth day brought them within sight of the territorial capital, its government buildings visible in the distance like a mirage of civilization. But between them and their destination lay open ground with no cover, a killing field that their enemies had undoubtedly prepared. "We can't ride straight in," Caleb said, studying the approach through his spyglass. "They'll cut us down before we get halfway." "There's another way," Brennan said, "underground." He explained that the capital had been built on the site of an old mining town, and the original tunnels still existed beneath the newer buildings. If they could reach the entrance to the old mine system, they could travel underground directly to the federal building. "And if the tunnels have collapsed," Martha asked, "then we die in the dark instead of in the sunlight," Brennan said with gallows humor. "But at least we died trying." The mine entrance was hidden in a ravine 2 miles west of town, concealed by decades of erosion and overgrowth. They left their horses tethered in a grove of mesquite and approached on foot, carrying only essential equipment and the precious documents. The tunnel mouth yawned before them like the entrance to hell itself. Stale air and the smell of long dead rock drifted up from the depths. Martha lit a torch and led the way into the darkness, her footsteps echoing off stone walls that seemed to press closer with each step. The underground journey took hours, through passages that sometimes widened into cathedral-like chambers and sometimes narrowed so much they had to crawl on hands and knees. Martha's torch burned low, then died, leaving them to navigate by feel and instinct through the absolute darkness. Finally, mercifully, they saw light ahead. Not daylight, but the warm glow of gas lamps filtering down through a grate in the tunnel ceiling. They had reached the basement of the federal building. Climbing through the grate, they found themselves in a storage room filled with boxes of legal documents and filing cabinets. Martha had never been so happy to see bureaucratic paperwork in her life. "Marshal's office is on the 3rd floor," Brennan said, leading them up a narrow staircase. But as they reached the second-floor landing, footsteps echoed from above. Heavy, boots moving with purpose. Too many boots for comfort. "We're expected," Caleb said grimly. "The back stairs," Judge Caldwell suggested, but even as he spoke, they could hear more footsteps from that direction. They were trapped between hostile forces with nowhere to run, and evidence that could reshape the entire territory if it reached the right hands. Martha felt the familiar surge of desperate determination that had carried her through every crisis since her wedding day. "The window," she said, pointing to a tall glass window that overlooked the street. "We can climb down the outside of the building." "That's 3 stories, Brennan protested. "Better than a gunfight in a confined space." Martha was already at the window, forcing it open despite years of paint and weather sealing. The street below looked impossibly far away, but she could see people moving, ordinary citizens going about their daily business, unaware of the drama playing out above their heads. She swung her leg over the windowsill and began to climb down, using decorative stonework and window ledges as handholds. The others followed, moving carefully but quickly as voices grew louder in the building behind them. They were halfway down when shots rang out from the window above. Chips of stone exploded around them as bullets searched for targets. Martha pressed herself against the building's wall, feeling the rough stone scrape against her cheek. "The marshal's private entrance," Brennan called down to her. "Around the corner, street level." Martha dropped the last few feet and rolled, coming up running. Behind her, she could hear the others landing hard but moving. Street vendors and pedestrians scattered as the pursuit spilled out of the building onto the sidewalk. The marshal's private entrance was a nondescript door marked only by a small brass plaque. Martha pounded on it with both fists, looking over. Her shoulder as armed men appeared around the corner of the building. The door opened to reveal a tall man with graying hair and a star-shaped badge pinned to his vest. His hand moved instinctively to his gun as he took in Martha's desperate appearance and the chaos erupting in the street beyond. "Marshal Harrison?" she gasped. "We have evidence of territorial corruption, documents that prove—" "Get inside," the marshal said curtly. Stepping aside to let them through, they tumbled into a small office as bullets shattered the window behind them. Marshal Harrison slammed the door and threw the bolt, then moved to a gun rack on the wall. "How many?" he asked, checking his rifle. "At least a dozen," Caleb replied, drawing his own weapon. "Professional killers working for corrupt officials." "Which officials?" Brennan pulled the documents from their oiled wrapping. "See for yourself." "Marshal." Harrison's expression grew darker as he scanned the papers. "Jesus Christ, Governor Mitchell is on here, half the territorial legislature. How did you get these?" "From Benjamin Torres's organization," Martha said. "He kept records of every transaction, every bribe, every agreement." "Torres is dead," the marshal said, "but his network isn't, and they'll kill anyone who threatens to expose them." As if to emphasize her point, something heavy crashed against the office door. The wood splintered but held. "My deputies are across town investigating a robbery," Marshal Harrison said grimly. "Probably not a coincidence." "So it's just us," Martha said. "Just us," the marshal agreed. The siege that followed lasted 3 hours. Corrupt officials and their hired killers surrounded the marshal's office, demanding the surrender of the documents and the people who had brought them. Marshal Harrison refused, barricading the doors and windows while preparing for a final stand. But help came from an unexpected source. Word of the standoff had spread through the territorial capital, and citizens began gathering in the street. Honest ranchers, shopkeepers, and workers who had suffered under the corrupt system for years. They didn't have badges or official authority, but they had numbers and righteous anger. When the shooting started, it wasn't the lawmen against the criminals, it was the people against their oppressors. The battle for the territorial capital raged through the afternoon, spilling across streets and into buildings as citizens fought to reclaim their government from the men who had stolen it. Martha found herself back to back with Caleb, their rifles speaking in deadly unison as they helped defend the marshal's office. When the smoke finally cleared, 13 corrupt officials were dead or in custody, their network of bribery and intimidation shattered beyond repair. The documents Martha had risked everything to deliver would serve as evidence in the trials that followed, trials that would reshape territorial politics for a generation. But for Martha, the victory felt strangely hollow. Standing in the aftermath of the street battle, surrounded by the debris of a corrupt system, she realized that justice was not a destination, but a journey, one that required constant vigilance and the courage to keep fighting even when the odds seemed impossible. "What now?" Judge Caldwell asked as they stood together outside the marshal's office. Martha looked at Caleb, seeing the same question in his eyes. They had broken the immediate threat, but there would always be others. Evil was like a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more would take its place. "Now we go home," she said, "and we keep fighting. One corrupt official at a time, one injustice at a time, one choice at a time." As they rode out of the territorial capital, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago she had been a bride in chains, helpless and afraid. Now she was a woman who had faced down killers and corrupt politicians alike, who had helped reshape the very foundation of territorial government. The transformation had not been easy, and it was far from complete. There would be more battles ahead, more difficult choices, more moments when doing the right thing seemed impossible. But Martha Caldwell had learned the most important lesson of all. True freedom was not the absence of chains, but the strength to break them whenever they appeared, and her choices had made her free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.